Okay, so we are recording and we've got people coming in. We're up to 100 people already.
Okay.
Okay, welcome everyone. If you've just come in, you're a few minutes early. So yeah, sit tight and get ready. And Paul will be starting in 5 minutes time.
Someone's called you Sir Will. That's good.
I do usually request that. Okay, and we've already got some comments in the chat box. That's great. You can see we've got people coming from all over.
Yeah, we have, haven't we? Yeah, I was expecting mainly the East, but we've got people from Europe too. Lovely.
My daughter has just come in. She's standing right next to me. I'm just going to ask her to leave. She's 2.5. I'm still here, everyone. Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome. We've still got a couple of minutes early, so we're going to Paul will start in just a couple of moments. Before we start, just a reminder to everyone, I see most of you have already got your chat settings correct, but a few of you, like I can see Christopher, you've got your chat setting to hosts and panelists. So can everyone please, above where you type, if you click where it says hosts and panelists and select everyone, and then everyone will be able to see your comments. So please make sure, you're sending your comments to everyone. It's great to have so many people. We've already got over 400 people here, and we're expecting to have more coming in. I was going to try and read out some of your names, but my chat box is moving so quickly. It's very difficult to see who's here. But welcome to everyone from wherever you are. All right, so by my watch, it is exactly 4 o'clock. So we are going to begin. So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. How to Help Students Reflect and Build Background Knowledge, presented by Mr. Paul Dummett. I'm very happy to be hosting the session today. My name is Will Lashett, and I am an academic consultant for National Geographic Learning. Personally, I'm very excited about this webinar with Paul. I have a lot of respect for his materials and his approach to ELT writing, and I think it's going to be a really fantastic session. So thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I'd like to take a minute to go over some of the functionality of the webinar platform. So first of all, at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice that there are several icons. The first button on the left is the chat function. So please make sure you are sending your message to everyone so that the whole group can read your message. And as a reminder, please keep your chat focused on the session. You will also see a Q&A button. So please use this to ask Paul or myself questions. So if you have a specific question, put it in the Q&A box, okay, not in the chat. And we will do our best to answer the questions as they come in. And I will also invite Paul to answer some of the questions at the end of the session, okay? So the chat box is really to communicate with Paul, and the Q&A is for specific questions. Finally, we will be sending along a certificate of attendance and a recording of the session within 3 business days of the webinar. I'm just going to say that again. So you will get your certificate and the recording within 3 working days. So please give us some time to get that out to you. I know that a lot of you are very keen to get the certificate, so it's not going to be immediate. Okay, so give us 3 days. Yes. Okay, so without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker. Paul Dummett is a teacher and writer based in Oxford, UK, where he ran his own school teaching English to professionals from 1996 to 2006. He currently teaches refugee children in Palestine and Jordan with the Hands Up project. His main interests are the use of images and narrative in language teaching and how these can aid deeper learning and memory. Seeking out writing projects that explore these interests, he's found a natural home at National Geographic Learning, co-authoring titles such as Life and Keynote, and acting as a course consultant for Look and Imagine. Most recently, he is the co-author of Reflect, a new 6-level academic series from National Geographic Learning. He enjoys travel, exercise, and live music, spoken word performance. And a very warm welcome to you, Paul, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Will. Thank you. Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Thank you for your introduction, Will. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope you're all keeping well in these strange times. It's very nice to be able to get together. And I'm guessing that some of you are veterans of talks on critical thinking. There's quite a lot said about critical thinking at the moment. And I hope that you'll find I have something fresh and new to say about the subject. As Will said, I'm a teacher, and really, like you, I hope I'm a teacher at heart. And my main interests really are in materials that work and methods that work, I should say, and materials that stimulate our students. So I hope we'll be looking at some of those today, and you'll be able to take away something practical and useful. So my talk today is about reflecting and building background knowledge, and it mainly relates to English for academic purposes. That's to say, preparing people who are going to be using English in an academic setting or for study purposes. And I'll be using examples from a new series from National Geographic called Reflect. But I would like to say that the talk also relates to people, preparing people, students for the world of work and for life in general. The question, how do we make very dense texts How do we make presenting arguments, writing essays or reports? How do we make those things more attainable, more accessible for learners? So when we started this series, or when the group started with this series, I came to it a little bit later. The question they posed themselves, this natural question you would pose yourself when you're trying to write materials for people about to use English for study, is what are the main challenges that learners face when they're preparing to study in English? And I'd just like I'll enumerate the answers that we came up with, or really the challenges that we came up with in a moment. But I'd just like to put that question to you first of all, and perhaps you could use the chat box and give your ideas. So the question is this: what do you think are the main challenges, or what do you find if you're preparing people for English for academic purposes? What are the main challenges for those learners preparing to study in English? Could you just pop your ideas in the chat box? I'm going to open the chat box and have a look at some of your comments. So comprehension and vocabulary, somebody said. Fear of new vocabulary, interesting. Yeah, the grammar, academic writing. The confidence to speak, yes, absolutely. Good. Fluency in speaking, people are saying. General anxiety, this question of anxiety and confidence is coming up quite a lot. Yeah. Good. Somebody's put unequal backgrounds, interesting. Fantastic. Writing again has come up. Good. The writing style, absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Some great points here, yeah. Some great points. Okay. Confidence in speaking fluently and so on. Great, fantastic. So let me just close that off and I'll move on to the questions that we came up with, or the questions that we characterized as the problem. So these were the three main challenges that we identified. The first one was that academic topics often seem kind of dry and inaccessible, kind of boring, if you like. And it's not always easy to get into them for the students to feel stimulated or motivated by them. The second one, and this came up a lot in the chat box, was that academic English, and particularly specific disciplines, and this would apply to specific work disciplines as well, if you were preparing people for English, using English in a specific work context, that they have a distinct vocabulary. So if you just took a particular discipline like anthropology, you might get very specific set of words like species, evolution, that sort of thing. If you took physics, you'd get words like mass and force and so on. And these aren't words that you would that would generally populate a general English course. So that is an issue. There's also the question of academic English having quite a specific grammar. And again, people raise this point. For example, the use of impersonal verbs. It's generally believed that is something that's very common in academic English. Or you get very complex, you generally get more complex, longer sentences, but you get very complex noun phrases. Only 3 out of the 36 people who took part in the study, and that would be the subject of the sentence, and then said responded negatively. So really complex noun phrases also. The last thing is students aren't familiar with, and again, people said this, academic writing, people aren't familiar with, students may not be familiar with core academic disciplines, things such as reading textbooks or listening to lectures or essay writing or standing up and giving a presentation or defending an argument. So How do we deal with those things? Well, how do we address these things? Well, of course, the question of dry topics, you try to present material which is as engaging and as relatable, and this is a word we'll use a lot today, as relatable, something they can relate their own experience to as much as possible. On the question of vocabulary, of course, you can't give them all the subject-specific words. So what you have to do instead is to help learners to build a kind of core academic vocabulary, expressions like according to the writer, a small proportion of that type of thing, to draw conclusions. So there's a kind of core vocabulary which will be useful in many different disciplines, many different academic disciplines. Those kinds of expressions obviously key also to developing an academic writing style. So you're writing in a more kind of formal style with the words that people sort of expect to see in academic writing. And the last thing, and again, this is important, is that we have to provide, is particularly important, we have to provide accessible and achievable models for writing and speaking. Students need to be able to see and to know what's expected of them. And they also need to see that what's expected of them is something they can easily achieve, not easily, or reasonably achieve. Okay. So those are the things you identified, and those were the kind of solutions to those challenges that we identified. But there's a fourth challenge, and that's really what I want to focus on today and talk about today. And this applies not just to academic topics, but to new topics in general. And I framed it here in this way, that students, especially at low levels, have to think critically about things that they have little experience of. So they have a kind of double challenge. And the question is, how do you avoid overwhelming students or learners by presenting them with a new subject and then asking them to discuss it and analyze it in quite a deep way? That's a big ask for somebody in a foreign language. And so that's an important challenge, and that's one I want to talk about particularly today. So for me, the key word, and this happens to be a kind of coincidence in a way, and I'll explain why, is reflect here. My colleague, my co-author and friend, John Hughes, and I wrote a book that you can just see here in the corner about critical thinking in English language teaching. And in it, we defined critical thinking as characterized by three types of thinking. So people give various different definitions of what critical thinking is, and we looked at all these definitions, and we kind of distilled it into our own definition, which was this. It's thinking reflectively. What does that mean? It means simply asking questions about the thing that's put in front of you, not just accepting it for what it is, but asking questions, being curious about the thing in front of you. The second is thinking rationally. That's clear. It means following your arguments in a logical way. And the third thing is thinking reasonably. What does that mean? It means that, and it's particularly true these days, that often the facts, all the facts are not available to you at a given time. And so when that happens, how can you think completely rationally and logically about it if you don't have all the information? What you often have to do is to try to come to a judgment as fairly and reasonably as you can, so without bias or prejudice. Good. Now, of these three things, clearly the most important, or clearly to me, the most important is reflective thinking, because reflective thinking is about being curious, and it's about thinking independently about language, about the content, and about the medium through which that content is delivered, whether it's a piece of writing, a novel, or whether it's orally delivered. At its most basic, it just means asking yourself what's really going on here before you respond to it. So the key is to kind of constantly provoke learners' curiosity about topics, then to invite them to relate that topic to their own experience, from then to reflect on what they've learned, and finally to consider how they can communicate this newfound knowledge and their ideas about the newfound knowledge through a particular medium. Let's just look at that cycle again, and in terms of what students would be asking themselves. So students begin, they look at the topic and you provoke their curiosity. They say to themselves, what's this about? They then relate to the topic. What do I know about this subject? What part of my experience could relate to this? Then they learn about the topic. They read something or listen to something about the topic, and they reflect on what they've learned. What were the key things that I learned here? They then try to communicate that. How can I explain what I've learned? And lastly, they sort of test out this new knowledge to see how it can be useful or how it can be applied. Is this a good example of this idea? So that's quite an abstract way of putting it. Let's just refer that, or let's look at these steps with a kind of concrete reference to some material. So here we are. This is a B1 listening text, and the topic is symbology. It's about symbols in early cave art, and the students are going to listen to a lecturer describing how a paleontologist, this woman you see on the right here, called Genevieve von Petzinger, made an incredible discovery about some 20,000-year-old cave paintings in different places around Europe. And she provokes our curiosity by asking the question, do these marks on the wall, which are not typical drawings of animals or people with spears and so on, do these marks on the cave wall have a meaning? So my question to you here, and again, perhaps you can just write your ideas in the chat box. My question is here, this is the topic that we're presenting students with. How do you think we could relate this subject of symbols to students' lives? What part of their experience could we draw on to do with symbols? What kind of symbols are they familiar with already, and what could help them into this subject? Could you just pop your ideas in the chat box and I'll open it up and have a look again. Okay, emoticons, emojis, people put road signs, emojis. Good, things to do with camping, interesting, good. Drawings, different shapes, icons that we use, yeah. GIF gaff, good, fantastic. Good, graffiti, interesting, yeah. Mathematical symbols, someone said. Okay, great, great. Good, the symbols you use in messages, and that's somebody's put, and that's exactly what we did here. It seemed the most obvious thing. So these emoticons and the symbols that we use every day are the things that symbols we can all relate to. So we ask students questions like this: what do these? Here's a little graph showing the top 10 most popular or most used emojis on Facebook. And we ask students what they mean, what they represent, which ones they use. Interesting question here. Again, you can pop it in the chat box if you like your answer, because I didn't really know the answer to this question, that there's one emoji that we use for thank you. Different people seem to use different emojis for that. I know you can't put the emoji in the chat box. Maybe you could describe it if you have an idea. What emoji do you use for thank you? And lastly, is there a feeling or expression that you haven't found an emoji for? And what could that look like? Because now we're starting to get them on the idea of how you might represent an idea through a symbol. And later in the unit, they have to devise their own symbols. They have to think of their own symbol to go with a public notice. So let's just see what people put about. People have used emojis. Fantastic for thank you. Okay, a smile. Yes, heart. Oh, yes, the hands. Yeah. As a thank you. Oh, that's Will. Good. Yes. Yes, I've seen that one before. Good. Most people put smiles. It's interesting. Yeah. Good. Okay. Lovely. So let's just have a look at this cycle now that we were talking about. A little more fully, but with some lower level material. And I'll just take you through what we're asking students to do. So this is now at A2 level, elementary level. And we're using the picture and the title to provoke curiosity. Often in National Geographic materials, we do this as a lead-in to a topic. And some fantastic photos, as you know, as a way of stimulating or engaging students' interest in the first place. So we ask them what's going on in the picture. I'm not sure if anyone can make that out. It's one of those pictures that you need to look at more than once to try and work out what's going on. And we ask them, this is the title of the unit, what does citizen science mean? And that's a question I'd like to put to you now. What do you think citizen science is? This is a topic they're going to learn about. But what do you think it is? What do you think that means? What could citizen science be? Again, any ideas? Science for people, a way of getting citizens involved. Good. About citizens' responsibilities. Interesting. Kind of exploring, yeah. Anything that ordinary people can get involved in, yeah. Good. Science in the community, okay, fantastic. Great, so you've got lots of lovely ideas here. Fantastic, about responsible citizenship, good. Yes, that which is relevant to people. Lovely ideas, lovely. Okay, so I'm going to give you the idea now. Or give you the answer, sorry. The students actually are going to watch a video, and this is just a still from the video, which explains it. I'm not going to show you this one. I'll show you a different video a little later. But the answer essentially is this. It's on the screen, scientific work by the general public, or what it really is, and the video explains this, is getting the public to help in collecting scientific data. And research institutes now do this quite a lot because it's so expensive and so time consuming to do their own large-scale studies. If you can co-opt the public into helping you, you save yourself a lot of money and you save yourself a lot of time also. So students from here, their curiosity is kind of naturally excited. And I don't know about you, but what I thought immediately, and perhaps some of you had the same ideas, that's a really interesting idea. That's a nice idea. I kind of love this. How could I get involved with this? And it's that kind of connection, with that kind of curiosity, which really engenders very sort of deep engagement with a topic. So we ask students these questions. We ask them to reflect on these things. What area of science interests you? What skills do you have that might make you a good citizen scientist? So think about that yourself for a moment. Do you have any particular skills that you think might make you a good citizen scientist? If I think myself, it could be perhaps I'm quite patient, perhaps that would work. And then how can you learn more about projects in the area that interests you? So when you start to ask yourself those questions and get engaged in something like this, there very naturally follows that kind of moment of doubt we have whenever we wonder about committing ourselves to a project or to helping someone do something, or to a new job. And you start to think to yourself, am I really qualified for this? And that's what this text is about, really. It answers the question, which naturally arises from thinking about this topic or from your curiosity about this topic, is this something that I could get involved in? Is it something that I'm qualified to do? And the text answers this, and it says, oh, yes, you are, is in fact the answer of this text. It explains that you could get involved in something like a bird count, where, yes, you might answer like an important question by sort of following the, or by counting each day the number of birds in your garden. And you might answer the question, is in fact the number of birds in our gardens and our backyards around us declining? Are there fewer of them? And if so, why is that happening? That's what the scientists really want to know in this case. So that would be an example of involvement in citizen science. From here, I'm just taking you through stages in a unit because it's going to make an important point. The learner's focus of reflection here is then turned to language, and using a skill that will help them become more independent learners in future. In this case, the skill is guessing meaning from context. And I'm showing you this because this raises a really important point, that critical thinking in language learning is not just about evaluating texts and ideas. It's also about asking questions about the way the language works. It's about identifying different forms and patterns in the language. Because language learning doesn't happen necessarily in a linear way. It doesn't, everything the teacher tells you, you don't simply absorb and remember and use correctly the next time. That progress comes about from your assimilating, reflecting on what's going on, and kind of working out for yourself how the language works, coming with a mixture of being helped to come to a realization and coming to that realization yourself. So critical thinking about language learning is a key part of language learning. So we must remember that we're promoting critical thinking to aid language learning specifically and to aid learning in general. So when they come to university or to use English in their study skills, that they'll use critical thinking in other ways. So a little further on in the unit, here we have something you'll probably recognize from a lot of materials, which is a critical thinking box. And you'll see critical thinking boxes in different materials, in different books. But the idea of putting critical thinking in a box in some ways can be misleading, because it can look like it's the first time that critical thinking has been practiced. But in fact, as we've seen, this is only the first time that it's being overtly practiced. We're drawing attention to it. It's actually been happening all the way through. It was happening when we asked the question, what is citizen science? It was happening when we asked students to relate this to their own experience and what skills they could bring to citizen science and so on. When we asked them to reflect on the topic or the content itself. It was also happening when we asked them to reflect on the language. So, and a method of how they might build on that language. This was guessing words from context. So students have been all the time been exploring these issues together, thinking critically, collaborating, and communicating. So critical thinking is going on all the time. But maybe we haven't considered enough yet how critical thinking is encouraged with lower language level students. And I know that's something that a lot of teachers have issues with. They can understand completely how it works at higher levels, at upper intermediate level, and so on, where students have the language available to discuss things in a more critical way. But people are less clear about how it works at lower levels, and that's what I'd just like to address now. At lower levels, we need to be mindful of three things. The first one is to consistently ask students to reflect on language and to reflect on ideas by asking more open and fewer kind of closed questions. So asking open-ended questions that give them some width to respond and think. Secondly, it's about grading instructions. So the language of instruction has to be graded to their level, down to their level, even though the ideas themselves are not being dumbed down, if you like, or brought down. The way in which they're expressed needs to be graded to their level. And the last thing is that learners need the language necessary to compare ideas, to evaluate their own ideas. They can't be asked to discuss something in a more critical way without having some of that core language necessary to do that. Let's just look at some of that. This is from an A1, so we're now at sort of beginner or upper beginner level book. And here are some questions which are practicing some vocabulary that students have learnt in the unit, the words diary, exercise, and feel. And so they're personalizing these questions. Do you write in a diary? Do you do any exercise? When do you feel happy? Okay, and you'll say, these aren't open-ended questions, and you'll be absolutely right. But in fact, what students are being asked to do here is ask the question and then follow it up. So, do you write in a diary? And then they're asked, when the student, their partner replies yes or no, they're asked to follow that up. What kind of diary do you write? And so on. Okay. Do you do any exercise? Can you tell me more about? So these follow-up questions, which actually do draw, they turn into more open-ended questions by drawing their interlocutor out. Good. In grading instructions, I mean how we make ideas kind of understandable. Here, students are asked to make comparisons. They're in fact asked to, again, this is like a low level, it's a beginner's book, and they look at a chart showing how different people spend their free time, and they're asked to compare their own use of their free time with the people in the chart, or the results of this sort of survey presented in the chart. And the idea here, the critical thinking idea, is that making comparisons is a useful way to add a different perspective to your analysis. But you couldn't say that to a elementary or beginner student. So what it actually says is this: when we compare things, we say how they're the same or different. And this helps you to understand the topic better. So the language is now put in words that the students can easily understand. And the last thing is providing the necessary language to talk about things and discuss things critically. Here it's the language of opinions and agreement, graded to the level. So you'll see very simple language. I agree, I don't agree, that's right, that's not right, and so on. And learners are asked what they think about this question. And I'm going to ask this question to you now. So the question they're asked about, the topic they're talking about, is what makes a sport? And they're asked specifically here, is Scrabble, the game the board game illustrated here. Is Scrabble a sport? And so I'd just like you to do this little poll here. Will's going to put the poll up. And I'd just like you to answer whether you think, so if you could just put your answer in the poll, whether you think Scrabble is a sport or not. Could you just a simple yes or no? So if you could just put your answer. I don't know if it's working, and Will.
It is working. Yeah, we've got almost 50% have voted. I'll just let it get to 50%.
Okay,
and then
great,
I'll
fantastic.
launch the result for you.
Good. Okay. Fantastic.
Okay, here we go.
Good. So
Can you see
the result? Oh, yep. Okay. So it seems to be. So most people seem to think it's a sport. Fantastic. So good. Good. That was the answer. We've got 62 to 38. That's a sort of clear result for yes. Good. Okay. So students then are going to discuss this, and they're going to discuss more widely the question of what constitutes a sport. And probably they have no experience of evaluating sports in this way, let alone in English. So, yeah, let me just make sure, have I not just hit the line? No, that's absolutely right. I think I've got to the right point, sorry. Yeah. So we looked at those three elements about critical thinking, about, yes, inviting reflection, asking open-ended questions, grading instructions, providing the language they need to talk critically. There's a fourth element here, as there was before, that's often overlooked. And this is very important. And not many people who talk about critical thinking talk about this. It's that background knowledge, having a certain amount of background knowledge to a topic, to a subject, informs critical thinking. It informs critical thinking at many levels, but especially at low levels, really. And so it's very important for us to help students to build that background knowledge. Teachers of English for academic purposes, university tutors often have an impression that learners aren't used to thinking critically. They say things, and I've come across these comments often, giving talks and so on. They say things like this, that they don't seem to want to engage with the topic, they're shy about voicing their opinions, or when I ask them to analyze ideas, and it's particularly true of kind of teenagers of 15, 16, they don't really have anything to say. So you get the impression that they're not used to thinking critically. Sometimes this could be because their local exams reward memorization of facts rather than critical or creative thinking. But I think it's often because learners aren't used to discussing certain topics. They have a different point of reference, maybe different socio-cultural knowledge. And so it's very difficult to ask them to evaluate and compare ideas when they don't actually have anything to compare them to. So one of our jobs is to try and help them build that background knowledge. That's something that's not going to, kind of key, if you like, to helping them develop a kind of critical thinking mindset, is to sort of engage them in topics about which they will have something to say. So either we can do that by tapping in to the topics they do know about already through personalization activities like the one we saw with symbols, or we can help them to build subject knowledge in different areas. Now, obviously, that subject knowledge is not going to come overnight. It's not going to happen suddenly. It comes from years of learning and paying attention to what's going on. But we can help to promote it with stimulating content, and also by relating that content to learners' lives. We can also do it by encouraging learner research, both inside the classroom. We can do it. We can get them to research things, topics that we're talking about, or we can ask them to do it outside the class. And I'd just like to ask you, how often now, we just have another little poll, how often do you ask your students to research a topic in English outside the class? Will, could you just pop that? Fantastic, there it is, this poll up. So how often do you ask your students, sorry, it says you students, your students, to research a topic in English outside the class? Is that something you do often, or just occasionally, or rarely, or never? Could people just answer that question? There's no judgment here. I'd just like to know how often you do it. Great. So we've got, yeah, often and occasionally. Occasionally seems to be the most popular. We've got the vast majority of people who do it more occasionally or more than occasionally. I think there are many good reasons for this, particularly preparing people for academic English or academic study in English, that it builds their research skills, that they're obviously practicing English while they do it, that they're also building their knowledge. This is what I've just been talking about. It's very important to try and build background knowledge because it informs critical thinking. And it also gives them the possibility to bring new ideas to the classroom and to test out those new ideas, which is interesting for everyone, for the for the students, for the teacher too. Okay. So one way I said we could do this is help build their knowledge is by bringing stimulating content to the classroom. And so let's get back to this burning question of whether Scrabble is a sport or not. And we'll see if we can build our background knowledge a little bit about this topic. So I'm going to show you a video now. And I hope everyone can hear the sound all right. Here we go.
Basketball, soccer, and baseball. We all agree these are sports. But what about Scrabble? You know, the game? Scrabble players take letters and make words with those letters. Is that a sport? Let's see how Scrabble compares to the definition of a sport. A sport is a game with rules and physical activity. 2 or more people compete. Players use their skills, and there is a winner at the end of the game. Well, Scrabble is a game with rules. 2 or more people play Scrabble. Good players have skills, and someone wins the game. But is it a physical activity? Do Scrabble players use their bodies? Scrabble uses a muscle. It uses the brain. Good Scrabble players work out the muscles in their brains during a competition. Good Scrabble players need to be healthy and fit. Being healthy and fit helps them not get tired during a game. Nigeria also believes Scrabble is a sport. The game is very popular there. There are clubs everywhere in the country, and there are professional Scrabble coaches and players. It is an official sport. Meet Wellington Jigure, the 2015 Scrabble World Champion from Nigeria. Jigure believes Scrabble helps people in many ways as a sport. For example, it gives people something to do in their free time, and it helps some people make money. Scrabble teaches life lessons too. Everyone likes to win, but sometimes we lose. Learning to be a good winner and a good loser is important in life.
Okay, so the video answered the question I put to you earlier, is Scrabble sport? It also gave a definition of what constitutes a sport, what a sport could be, using the example of Scrabble. So the question which next arises, this is the students, remember this is at A1 level, this is a beginner level. How are we going to get the students to test out this newfound knowledge about what constitutes a sport? So consider that for a moment. How are we going to get them to test out this knowledge, perhaps from their own experience or perhaps from using research? Well, you can see here's a little brainstorming activity, and it's the task that this has been leading to. The students must think about and analyze games and sports they know, and perhaps, if they like, research some sports a little more. Notice that in the rubric, it says choose an activity from the ideas below or your own idea. And it's always a good idea to offer a choice to students of using what knowledge they have already, drawing on what they know already, or using your suggestions, yours, the teacher's suggestions, or the suggestions in the book, so that they can research something, but in a supported way. I don't know which one you would choose to research more. E-gaming is the choice they're giving. Fishing, is that really a sport? Competitive eating, who can eat the most food in a short time? Or parkour, which is, or sometimes called free running. I think I might choose that one because I find that thing interesting. So they're offered a choice, and this is how they're going to now test out this new knowledge of what defines a sport, of what a sport is. And they're then going to present it. So unit tasks can, or tasks can draw on knowledge that students already possessed, or they can ask them to do research into something relevant to them. And that kind of combination is the way to reassure them that they can approach new subjects with confidence. That's something which is kind of key for university study. And this came up right at the beginning at the poll, when I asked you right at the beginning, what is it that students, what are the main challenges for people in facing learning English for academic study? And for a lot of people put up in that chat box, it was to do with confidence. And so this is absolutely key thing, that you, by doing this, by giving them this opportunity to bring their own knowledge and also to do a little research into something relevant to them, they can feel reassured that they have that ability, that new topics are not something to be afraid of necessarily for them. So I'm just going to show you a couple more examples. This was from a level that I wrote at a higher level, at B1 plus level. And the first one was a unit about a sense of place, what it means to have a sense of belonging to a place. And the task that follows from it is students conduct interviews with each other about a place which is important to them or special to them. And they're given a little questionnaire to ask what the place is and why, particularly, what are the reasons that that place is special to someone. It may be to do with family. It may be something to do with the landscape itself. It could be for other reasons. It could be for work or something like that. It's a place that's provided them with a livelihood, for example, or their parents with a livelihood. So that's a kind of obvious task from that. Another one, another unit in the book is on cultural borrowing. That is to say, things that are borrowed from one culture by another culture. And so my last question to you is, what do you think students could easily research? What kind of task could we give them? What do you think students could easily research on that topic if they wanted to do a little research and then present something as a little talk, present something to the other students in the class on cultural borrowing? What sort of, what subject do you think? I mean, the subject is cultural borrowing, but what specifically do you think they might look at? What kind of things could they look at? Could you just pop your ideas in the chat box if that's possible? If you, clothes and food, fantastic. Music, fashion, yeah. Gestures, lovely, lovely. Chinese characters, yes. Movies, games, culture, language, someone has put. Yeah, foreign words, fantastic. Brilliant ideas, lovely, yeah, love it. Good. Festivals, fantastic. Yeah, so all very, yeah, really motivating things to research. And again, things which they probably know something about already, but they could do a little bit of extra research to bring more interest to it. So let's just have a look at what it was, in fact, in the book. It was words, and somebody mentioned this, language, yes. So students are asked to research words in their language that are borrowed, not just from English, but from other languages. And then they'll present their findings, the borrowed words, with the reasons probably why they've been borrowed. So sometimes it's a technology that was developed in another country, so it has a specific word, or it might be for another reason. It might be a word that was borrowed because there was no good word in the local culture to describe that exact thing. Good. So I kind of come to the end now. I'm just going to sum up what I've been talking about, what reflection means to me, because reflection is the key thing here that I wanted to get across, that it's about being curious and stimulating curiosity about new subjects. It's also about thinking independently, not just about the ideas and the content, but also about the language and how the language works, because that's how you develop and assimilate a proper understanding and control of the language. And lastly, about it means considering what you know already, what's part of your own experience, and developing new knowledge alongside it. Because as you build new knowledge, you become a better critical thinker. Background knowledge informs critical thinking, helps critical thinking, aids critical thinking, if you like. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for your participation. Some really nice ideas, I thought, coming through, and I loved seeing that. And I'll just hand back to Will now, who's going to sum up and perhaps field any questions or answer any questions, and maybe I'll answer some questions that you've had in the last few minutes we have. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. That was really fascinating presentation. And as you said, I could see a lot of people commenting and sharing their ideas in the chat box. So I think we had a lot of great engagement there, and people, I can see from the chat that they've really got a lot out of the session. There are some questions in the Q&A box. So if you click on there, you'll be able to have a look. I will start off. I've picked one that I'm going to ask you, as you were just talking about independence. And there's a question here from Ollie, which is, how can we encourage students or motivate them to take responsibility to build their own background knowledge?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Will? I was just looking at comments.
So how can we, I guess, as teachers, how can we encourage and motivate students to take responsibility for building their own background knowledge?
I think that's a very good question. Yeah, and I think, you know, that's often the frustration that people, that some tutors have, is that learners don't seem to be particularly invested in doing that. They have other interests, particularly teenagers, and quite naturally they have other interests. I think one of the things I was showing you, this idea of offering like little projects, research projects, and trying just to tap in, always keeping an eye out and an ear out for the things which engage them and the things which really do interest them. Because though seemingly they might seem bored by certain topics, by actually getting them engaged in something, asking them to research something, it may just trigger something or provoke an interest that then grows. And yeah, that would be my answer to that.
Great, thank you. And is okay, shall I pick another one, or do you want to pick one for yourself?
Please, no, please pick another one.
Okay,
yeah.
right. So there was quite a good one here about, so Sarah is asking about the brainstorming activity, and she says, do you think that using a brainstorming activity is too difficult for A1 level students? And what should we do if there's no reaction or no interaction in this situation?
That's a very, that's a good question. I think with low-level students, I think we have to be aware of here with academic materials for A1 students is there's a kind of, I think what we're trying to do in this book particularly, perhaps I should say, is first of all, is kind of bridge, make a bridge between general and academic English. So the kind of sort of activities, personalization things, activities that students are familiar with in class to help those to move across to something a little more academic with a little bit more research. And I hope some sense of that came through. So it's really about finding, the brainstorming is really about finding engaging topics. It's just about, I mean, often I'm teaching a beginner myself at the moment. It's just a one-to-one thing. And sometimes topics just fall flat. They don't work. And then sometimes another thing I find, if I take it in a slightly different direction, it's just, I think as a teacher, it's just about persevering and asking the right question when suddenly you tap into something that the person really wants to talk about and really has experience of. And then the language comes. He really doesn't, the student I'm talking about really doesn't have very much to work with. But when he feels the motivation to speak, then we get there through me helping him, through the little language that he does have. It can be done. I think that's the key thing. I think that motivation to speak, to draw from your own experience and to speak, overcomes these difficulties. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Paul. I think that's a great answer. And I think we've got time for one more. So we've got a question here from Tomo. And the question is, I think this is a question that it's a big question in ELT. How much of the student's native language, or L1, are we allowed to use, or should we use, when we're introducing background knowledge or encouraging critical thinking? So yeah, how much of the student's L1 should we be using in the classroom?
God, I think it's absolutely fine to use some of the L1 in the language classroom. I don't know what you to approach these things. I know there's been a long debate about this. I know when I first started training as a teacher, my first lesson was actually in Japanese, and the first 30 minutes of it was completely in Japanese. And I have to say that all the phrases I learnt then, I was constantly being asked a question in Japanese and asked to give a certain response. And the phrases then from 30 years ago, because I was constantly having to do it in the language, have stuck with me, even though I've never learnt Japanese since. I've never had an opportunity to use Japanese since. Those have stuck with me. But for the remainder of the lesson, we had certain ideas then and grammatical forms explained to us in English, in fact. So I think it's a mixture of the two, but I don't think there's a, I think that that practice of making students recall language, the target language, the language you're trying to teach, from short-term memory before they hear it explained or see it explained in their native language is incredibly powerful, and it's incredibly powerful for memory. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, I think that answers the question very well. I mean, we have a lot of other questions, but I think we're running out of time. So I'm just going to wrap up a little bit, and there are a few things, a little bit of housekeeping that I'd like to mention to everyone who's here. Yeah, so firstly, again, to Paul, thank you very much for that really wonderful session. And thank you to everyone who joined us. A few of you have been asking about feedback. So immediately after the session, when you leave Zoom, you'll be directed to a feedback survey. So you'll be able to let us know what you thought. If you're interested in learning more about the Reflect program that Paul has been showing us some examples for today, I've just put into the chat box, there's a link there, which will take you to the interactive sampler, where you'll be able to just have a look and a little explore at the program for yourself. I'm also going to put in here, if you would like to talk to someone from National Geographic Learning about Reflect or about any other question you have, you can use this link that I just put in that says Rep Finder, and you'll be able to get in touch with someone. A few of you have been asking about future webinars. So I'm going to put another couple of links in the box now. So if you stop typing just for a moment, okay, because these are going to get lost. But there are two links I've just put in here into the chat box. The first one is for our regional Asia webinars, and the second one is for our global webinar. So we have another fantastic author giving a session next week. It's Catherine Stannett, and she's doing a session on inspiring curiosity, communication, and creativity in the young learner classroom. So if you're a young learner teacher, I definitely recommend that you sign up for one of for that session. And finally, I know a lot of you are asking about your certificate. I did mention it earlier, but I'm going to mention it again. We will send out to you an email within 3 working days. Okay, so for me right now, it's Wednesday. So it should be with you Friday or Monday at the latest. And on Monday or Friday, when you get that email, it will have a link to the recording of this session, and it will also have the certificate. Okay, so you will get that by Friday, I think by Friday or by Monday at the latest. Let me just give you one more thing into the chat box for you. So this, what I'm putting in now, this is the email address for our webinar, So if you have a problem, you don't receive that email, please email ngl.webinars@cengage.com, and you can make a request for your certificate there. Okay, so okay, so that brings us to the end. So I hope everyone has enjoyed the session and learned a lot, as I have, and we are looking forward to seeing you again very soon at another one of our webinars. And Paul, we're looking forward to inviting you back to give another session, hopefully in the near future as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, cheers, everyone. Okay, goodbye. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.